of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land and clime, hearken to my joyful tidings of the golden future time.
How they toiled and sweated to get the hay in. Sometimes the work was hard. The implements had been designed for human beings and not for animals. But the pigs could think of a way round every difficulty, and the horses understood the business of mowing and raking better than Jones had ever done. The pigs did not actually work, but directed and supervised, and every animal down to the humblest worked at turning the hay and gathering it. In the end, they finished the harvest in 2 days less time than it had usually taken Jones. Moreover, it was the biggest harvest that the farm had ever seen. All through that summer the work went like clockwork. The animals were happy as they had never conceived it possible to be. With the worthless parasitical human beings gone, there was more for everyone to eat. They met with many difficulties, but the pigs with their cleverness and Boxer with his tremendous muscles always pulled them through. Boxer was the admiration of everybody. From morning to night he was pushing and pulling, always at the spot where the work was hardest. His answer to every problem was, "I will work harder," which he adopted as his personal motto. But everyone worked according to his capacity. Nobody stole, nobody grumbled over his rations. The quarrelling and biting and jealousy which had been normal features of life in the old days had almost disappeared. On Sundays there was no work. Breakfast was an hour later, and after breakfast all the animals trooped into the barn for a general assembly which was known as the meeting. Here the work of the coming week was planned out, and resolutions were put forward and debated. It was always the pigs who put forward the resolutions. The other animals understood how to vote, but could never think of any resolutions of their own. Snowball and Napoleon were by far the most active in the debates, but it was noticed that these two were never in agreement. Whatever suggestion either of them made, the other could be counted on to oppose it. The meeting always ended with the singing of Beasts of England. The pigs had set aside the harness room as a headquarters for themselves. Here, in the evenings, they studied blacksmithing, carpentry, and other necessary arts from books which they had brought out of the farmhouse. Snowball also busied himself with organizing the other animals into what he called animal committees. He formed the Egg Production Committee for the hens, the Clean Tails League for the cows, the Whiter Wool Committee for the sheep. On the whole, these projects were a failure. The reading and writing classes, however, were a great success. The dogs learned to read fairly well. Muriel the goat could read somewhat better than the dogs. Benjamin could read as well as any pig, but never exercised his faculty. So far as he knew, there was nothing worth reading. Clover learnt the alphabet, but could not put words together. Boxer could not get beyond the letter D. None of the other animals on the farm could get further than the letter A. It was found that the stupider animals such as the sheep, hens, and ducks were unable to learn the 7 commandments by heart. After much thought, Snowball declared that the 7 commandments could be reduced to a single maxim: 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. So, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad was inscribed on the end wall of the barn above the 7 commandments and in bigger letters. Napoleon took no interest in Snowball's committees. He said that the education of the young was more important, and took 9 puppies away from Jessie and Bluebell, their mothers, saying that he would make himself responsible for their education. He took them up into a loft and kept them there in such seclusion that the rest of the farm soon forgot their existence. The mystery of where the milk went to was soon cleared up. It was mixed every day into the pig's mash. The apples were now ripening, and the orchard was littered with windfalls. The animals had assumed as a matter of course that these would be shared out equally. One day, however, the order went forth that all the windfalls were to be collected for the use of the pigs. At this, some of the other animals murmured, but it was no use. All the pigs were in full agreement, even Snowball and Napoleon. Squealer was sent to make the necessary explanations. "Comrades," he cried, "you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in a spirit of selfishness and privilege. Many of us actually dislike milk and apples, but milk and apples contain substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. It is for your sake that we drink that milk and eat those apples. Do you know what would happen if we pigs failed in our duty? Jones would come back. Surely, comrades, there's no one among you who wants to see Jones come back." Now, if there was one thing that the animals were completely certain of, it was that they did not want Jones back. So it was agreed that the milk and the apples should be reserved for the pigs alone. Most of this time Mr. Jones had spent sitting in the tap-room of the Red Lion at Willingdon, complaining of the monstrous injustice that had been done. The other farmers sympathized but did not help. Nevertheless, the owners of the two farms which adjoined Animal Farm, Foxwood and Pinchfield, were both frightened by the rebellion. Early in October, a flight of pigeons alighted in the yard of Animal Farm in the wildest excitement. Jones and all his men, with half a dozen others from Foxwood and Pinchfield, were coming up the cart track. They were all carrying sticks except Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun. Obviously, they were going to attempt the recapture of the farm. This had long been expected, and all preparations had been made. Snowball, who had studied an old book of Julius Caesar's campaigns, was in charge. He gave his orders, and in a couple of minutes every animal was at his post. As the human beings approached the farm buildings, Snowball launched his attack. All the pigeons flew to and fro over the men's heads and dropped their dung, while the geese rushed out and pecked their legs. Then Muriel, Benjamin, and the sheep, with Snowball at the head of them, rushed forward and butted the men from every side. But the men were too strong, and suddenly, at a squeal from Snowball, all the animals turned and fled into the yard. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw, as they imagined, their enemy in flight and rushed after them. This was just what Snowball had intended. As soon as they were inside the yard, the horses, the cows, and the pigs emerged in their rear, cutting them off. Snowball now gave the signal for the charge. He dashed straight for Jones, who raised his gun and fired. The pellets scored bloody streaks along Snowball's back, and a sheep dropped dead. Without halting, Snowball flung his 15 stone against Jones's legs. Jones was hurled into a pile of dung, and his gun flew out of his hands. But the most terrifying spectacle of all was Boxer, rearing up on his hind legs and striking out with his great iron-shod hooves. At the sight, several men dropped their sticks and tried to run. Panic overtook them, and the next moment all the animals together were chasing them round the yard. They were gored, kicked, bitten, trampled on. There was not an animal that did not take vengeance on them after his own fashion. The men bolted for the main road.